My name is Margaret Lane, and today I sat in a lawyer's office, surrounded by the people I thought were my family, and discovered I was worth less than a dog. 30 years of marriage, 30 years of sacrifice. And when the papers were read, when his final words were spoken through the ink of his last will, my husband left me nothing, not a dollar. Not the house I helped clean every day, not the business I stayed up late helping him manage when he was too tired to balance the books. Nothing. Every cent, every piece of property, every last shred of security was left to the family dog. I wish I could tell you this was some sick joke, but it wasn't. The lawyer's voice echoed in that cold office, his tone flat and professional as if he were reading the weather forecast. To my beloved Labrador, Max, I leave the entirety of my estate. Assets, accounts, and properties are to be placed in trust for his care. The room went silent for a moment, and then came the laughter. Not kind laughter, not nervous laughter. Cruel, sharp laughter that sliced me open. My own children, the very ones I had nursed through fevers, guided through school projects, comforted through heartbreak, were snickering, shaking their heads, smirking as if my humiliation were the punchline of some family joke. My eldest daughter leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed, and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Even the dog is worth more than Mom." The others chuckled. No one defended me, no one. I sat there, my hands trembling against the worn leather of my handbag, and I wanted to scream. I wanted to leap across the table and tear the will to pieces. But I didn't. I sat still, silent, my breath shallow, because I knew something they didn't. I knew that even the most carefully written betrayals often have cracks in the ink. And as I stared at the papers, at the smug faces of my children and the impassive face of the lawyer, a question rose inside me, one that has haunted me every hour since. After giving a man my entire life, after raising a family that now mocks me, what am I really worth? Let me take you back, because this humiliation, this cruelty didn't appear out of nowhere. Betrayal never does. It starts small, like a whisper behind a closed door, like a shadow that lingers just a little too long. My husband, Robert, was a man who thrived on appearances. He loved a polished image, the perfect suit, the smile for the neighbors, the handshake at church. People said we were the perfect couple. He the businessman, strong and decisive, me the devoted wife who always stood quietly beside him. No one saw the nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while he came home late, his excuses wrapped in cologne and half-truths. No one saw the way our children slowly drifted toward him, not because he loved them more, but because he bought their loyalty with gifts, promises, and whispers about who would inherit what. The truth is, I had begun to suspect something months before that reading, papers disappearing from his study, conversations that stopped the moment I entered the room. My husband's sudden obsession with the dog, of all things. He bought Max a bed more expensive than the mattress I slept on. He fed him steaks while I stretched the grocery budget to cover the bills he neglected. And the children, instead of questioning it, played along, cooing over the dog, laughing at my discomfort, treating me as though I were the outsider in my own house. I told myself it was just a phase, some midlife eccentricity, some odd joke. But in my heart, I felt the storm gathering. So when the lawyer read those words, to my beloved Labrador, I was shocked. Yes, but not surprised. Betrayal rarely surprises the one who has carried the weight of suspicion for years. What did surprise me was the cruelty of my children. Their laughter burned worse than the betrayal of my husband, because his betrayal was the betrayal of a man to his wife, but theirs was the betrayal of children to their mother, and that kind of betrayal cuts deeper than any knife. As the lawyer closed the folder, my youngest son leaned toward me and muttered, "Guess you'll be the dog's maid now, huh?" The others burst out laughing. My cheeks burned, but I refused to cry in front of them, not one tear. I straightened my back, gripped the armrests of that chair, and looked at each of them. I wanted to shout, Do you think you've won? Do you think you've humiliated me enough? But instead, I bit down on the rage and whispered to myself so softly that no one could hear, "This isn't over." I left the office that day with my head down, the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears. I stepped into the hallway, the smell of polished wood and stale coffee heavy in the air, and I thought to myself, after 30 years, I am nothing. Nothing but a widow mocked by her children, betrayed by her husband, left to care for a dog who apparently holds more value than I do. But as I walked out into the sunlight, clutching my bag like a shield, a thought struck me. They believed they had destroyed me with that will. But what if the will wasn't the end? What if hidden inside those cruel words was the very thing that would give me back everything they thought they had stolen? I didn't know it yet, not fully, but I felt it, like the distant rumble of thunder before the storm breaks. Something in that will, something in the law itself, would turn the tables. They thought they had reduced me to a joke, to less than a dog, but none of them realized the law had one cruel twist they didn't see coming, and when it came, it would burn through every lie, every sneer, every ounce of betrayal. They would learn that I was not a woman to be erased. I remember the first time I felt that chill, the first time I knew something was wrong, though I couldn't put it into words. It was late autumn, the kind of evening when the air carries the scent of burning leaves and the light falls too quickly. Robert was in his study, a room he once shared freely with me, a room where I had spent hours helping him sort invoices and balance accounts when he was building his business. But lately, that door had been closed more often than open. That night, I walked down the hallway with a basket of folded laundry in my arms. The door was cracked just enough for me to see him hunched over his desk. Papers were spread across the surface, but when he noticed me, he quickly shoved them into a folder and snapped it shut. His eyes met mine, and for the briefest moment there was guilt there. Guilt and something colder. Contempt. "Why are you sneaking around?" he asked sharply, though I hadn't said a word. His tone cut me, and I froze in the doorway. "I was just bringing your shirts," I replied quietly, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. He snatched the laundry from my arms without a thank you and slammed the door in my face. That slam echoed louder than any shout. I stood there, staring at the painted wood, wondering what secrets lived behind it. It wasn't just the papers, it was everything. He had grown more possessive of his briefcase, carrying it from room to room as if it contained treasure. He had begun locking his desk drawers, something he had never done before in all our years together, and he had started calling our lawyer more frequently. I'd hear his low voice drifting down the hall, words like revisions and clauses and trust. When I entered the room, he would end the call abruptly, telling me it was business. But my instincts told me it was something else, something darker. And then there was Max, the dog. I had nothing against the Labrador, of course. He had been a Christmas gift years earlier, a ball of golden fur that had warmed our children's childhood. But lately, Robert's affection for Max had turned into obsession. He built the dog a custom kennel in the backyard, equipped with heating and air conditioning, more elaborate than anything I had ever been given. He ordered gourmet meals for him, steaks and salmon delivered weekly from a specialty shop downtown. He paid for spa treatments. Yes, spa treatments for a dog, while I clipped coupons to stretch the grocery money. It wasn't lost on me that the children followed his lead. They began fawning over the dog as if he were royalty. My eldest son once joked, "Max is the golden child, Mom. You should accept it." They laughed, and I forced a smile, but inside I felt a cold seed of dread. It was as if they were rehearsing some cruel play where I was the outsider and the dog was the heir. The real breaking point of that first suspicion came one Sunday morning. I had gone into Robert's study to dust, something I had done for years. I wasn't snooping. I was simply cleaning, the way wives do in houses where their labor is invisible. but when I opened the drawer of his desk, I found it locked. My husband had never locked me out of anything before, not in 3 decades. I stared at that lock, my rag limp in my hand, and felt my chest tighten. When had my presence become something to keep out? That night, I confronted him, not with accusations, just with the quiet honesty of a wife who wanted to understand. "Robert," I said as we sat at the dinner table, the silverware clinking softly, "why is your desk locked now?" He didn't look up from his plate. He carved his meat with deliberate precision, chewed, swallowed, then said, "Because some things are private." "Private?" I repeated, stunned. "After 30 years of marriage, you need privacy from me?" He finally looked up, his eyes dark and hard. "Don't start. You wouldn't understand legal matters, just trust me." "But how can you trust a man who slams doors, who hides papers, who spends more on a dog's dinner than on his wife's groceries?" That was the first night I lay awake long after he had fallen asleep, listening to the steady rise and fall of his breath while my mind raced. I stared into the darkness and asked myself questions I never thought I would ask. Was he rewriting his will? Was he cutting me out? And why did his eyes always soften when he looked at Max, but grow cold when they landed on me? Days turned into weeks, and the tension grew. I began noticing things I had ignored before. The way he lingered in the lawyer's office longer than necessary, the way he dismissed my questions with a wave of his hand, the way the children began parroting his disdain. My eldest daughter once said, half joking, half cruel, "Careful, Mom, or Dad will leave everything to Max." They laughed as if it were just a joke, but the laughter carried a truth that made my stomach twist. Looking back now, I realize that was the first escalation. That was the moment the betrayal began to take form, not as suspicion, but as reality. It was the first crack in the facade of our marriage, the first whisper of the storm that would one day sweep through my life and leave me sitting in a lawyer's office, listening to my children laugh at me. I wish I had screamed then. I wish I had demanded answers, broken the lock on that drawer, ripped open the folder he hid so quickly, but I didn't. I bit my tongue, swallowed my pride, and told myself it couldn't be true. That a man I had loved for so long wouldn't humiliate me, wouldn't betray me in such a grotesque way. But betrayal is patient. It waits in locked drawers. It grows in whispered phone calls. It festers in the laughter of children who have already chosen their side. That was the beginning, the first step down a staircase that would lead me into the coldest, cruelest room of my life. And I walked it blindly, holding on to faith that was already crumbling. The second time the storm pushed closer, it didn't come from Robert, not directly. It came from outside, from a pair of lips that had no reason to lie to me. Sometimes betrayal reveals itself not in the words of the guilty, but in the whispers of those who accidentally witness too much. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Jane, my neighbor and one of the last friends I could still trust, stopped by with a basket of muffins she had baked. She was a woman of warmth, with laugh lines around her eyes and a heart that never judged. She knocked softly and stepped inside, the scent of cinnamon filling the air. I hadn't told her about my suspicions. Not fully, but perhaps she saw it in my tired eyes. She set the basket on the counter and looked at me carefully. "You all right, Margaret? You look pale." I forced a smile. "Just tired. Robert's been working a lot." She hesitated, then glanced toward the hallway, as if making sure he wasn't near. "Working?" she asked in a low voice. Funny, because I could have sworn I heard him the other day saying something about you not needing to worry about the house much longer. Her words cut through me like glass. "What do you mean?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. She lowered her gaze. "I was in the garden when your eldest, Charles, came over to talk to him. They didn't see me. I didn't mean to listen, Margaret, but I heard Robert say, 'Don't worry, son. She won't stand in our way once the paperwork is done.' And Charles laughed. He said something about finally having what he deserved. I didn't hear the rest. I'm sorry. My heart pounded so hard I thought Jane could see it through my blouse. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. They said that? She nodded. I thought maybe I misheard. But the look on their faces, Margaret, it wasn't the look of men talking about business. It was the look of men planning something. Something cruel. I thanked her, my voice trembling. But inside me, a storm raged. So it wasn't just Robert. My own son was in on it. The boy I had nursed through measles. The boy I had stayed up with during exam nights. The boy whose nightmares I had soothed with lullabies. He was laughing about cutting me out of my own life. That evening, I tried to watch them at dinner, tried to see the truth in their faces. Charles joked easily, his eyes glinting with something I hadn't noticed before, something sharp and calculating. Robert leaned back in his chair, sipping his wine, speaking with the calm confidence of a man who believed he was in control. Their glances exchanged like signals in a language I wasn't meant to understand. When I reached for the bread, my hand trembled so badly that the knife clattered against the plate. "Careful, Mom," Charles teased. "Don't want you hurting yourself. Wouldn't want to have to put you in a home." Robert chuckled softly, and the others joined in. My cheeks burned. Once their laughter had been my joy. Now it was a weapon. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Jane's words echoing in my ears. "She won't stand in our way once the paperwork is done." What paperwork? What were they planning? And why had my son, my flesh and blood, chosen to side with his father against me? I remembered Charles as a boy, running barefoot through the yard, his hair golden in the sunlight, his hand always reaching for mine. I remembered the nights he cried when he failed his math tests, how I sat for hours tutoring him, patient, loving. I remembered his first heartbreak, when he sobbed into my lap, and I told him he would find love again. And now, that same boy looked at me as though I were an obstacle, a wall between him and some treasure he felt entitled to. The betrayal grew heavier with each passing day. I began to notice the way my other children followed Robert's lead, too. Elizabeth whispered to him in the kitchen, glancing at me with eyes that carried disdain. Michael began speaking to me less and less, as if my voice no longer mattered. They weren't my children anymore. They were his soldiers, and I was the enemy. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find them huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. The moment I entered, silence fell. They stared at me as if I had intruded into a private club. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Nothing," Robert said quickly. "Just family matters." "I'm family," I whispered. "Are you?" Charles shot back. His words hung in the air like poison. I felt my throat tighten, my knees weaken, but I forced myself not to cry. I turned and walked out, each step heavier than the last. Behind me, I heard them chuckle, as if my pain were entertainment. That night, in the quiet darkness of my bedroom, I clutched the pillow and let the tears flow. They thought I couldn't hear their plans. They thought I was blind, deaf, powerless. But I wasn't. I had heard enough. And though I didn't know yet what the paperwork was, I knew one thing. They had chosen their side. They had chosen him. And I was alone. Jane called me the next day, her voice soft with worry. "Margaret, I hope I didn't upset you the other day. I just thought you had the right to know." "You did the right thing," I whispered. "Thank you." "You're stronger than you think," she told me. "Don't let them make you doubt that." But how could I not? Every glance, every word, every laugh told me I was already being erased. They were building a world without me, a world where I was nothing but an afterthought. And the cruelest part was that my own son was helping lay the bricks. That was escalation's second wave. Not just the suspicion of betrayal, but the confirmation. Not just the coldness of a husband, but the treachery of a child. I felt it then, the walls closing in, the shadows lengthening. I was not merely excluded, I was surrounded. And the laughter that once filled our home had become a weapon aimed directly at my heart. If the first wave was suspicion and the second was confirmation, then the third was humiliation. By then, it wasn't just whispers behind doors or coded glances across the dinner table. By then, they had grown bolder. Betrayal had ripened into open mockery, and they no longer cared if I saw it. In fact, they seemed to enjoy my pain. It started small with little slights. Robert stopped inviting me to family discussions, saying they were about business. My children no longer asked for my advice, no longer turned to me with their worries. Instead, they turned to him, as if I were invisible. I would walk into a room and the conversation would stop. Silence would stretch, thick and heavy, before someone would cough and change the subject. I told myself it was my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. One evening, I entered the kitchen to find Elizabeth perched on a stool, sipping wine with Robert. She was laughing, tossing her hair like a girl, though she was 35. When she saw me, her smile faltered, then turned into something colder. "Oh, Mom," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with false pity. "Don't you think you should rest? You look tired." Robert smirked and poured her another glass. They didn't even offer me one. I stood there, rooted to the floor, my hands clenched into fists. "This is my kitchen," I whispered, but they ignored me, turning their laughter back on each other as if I hadn't spoken at all. Soon, it wasn't just exclusion. It was ridicule. My youngest, Michael, started making jokes at my expense during family dinners. "Careful, Mom," he'd say, as I reached for the salt. "Don't spill it again. We wouldn't want you to make a mess." Everyone would laugh, even Robert, who used to defend me when the children teased. Now he encouraged it, leaning back in his chair, his eyes glittering with something cruel. But the worst came on a night that should have been ordinary. I had gone to bed early, exhausted from the weight of it all. When I opened the door to the master bedroom, I stopped. My side of the bed was stripped bare. The sheets, the pillow, everything was gone. In its place was Max, the dog, sprawled across the mattress, his golden fur glowing in the lamplight. Robert sat on the edge of the bed, stroking him gently, a glass of brandy in his hand. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't look at me. "Max needs space. You can sleep in the guest room." The guest room. The words hit harder than any slap. "You're putting me out of my own bed? For a dog?" He turned then, his face calm, almost amused. Not just a dog, my heir. I staggered back, my breath caught in my throat. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just a joke, wasn't just eccentricity. He meant it. He truly saw Max as more worthy than me. I stumbled into the hallway, tears burning my eyes, and spent the night in the cold guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of his laughter drifting down the hall. The next morning, I tried to confront him. "Robert, do you understand what you're doing to me? To us?" He looked up from his newspaper, his expression flat. "Don't be dramatic, Margaret. You're fine. You've always been too sensitive." Too sensitive. As if I were the problem. As if being cast aside for a dog was nothing more than a quirk I should endure. My children followed his lead. They stopped visiting me in the guest room. They stopped asking me about my day. They treated me like a tenant in my own home, someone tolerated out of obligation, not love. One evening, I overheard Charles telling his siblings, "Once Dad finalizes everything, she'll be out for good. Might as well get used to it." Their laughter echoed through the walls, stabbing me deeper than any blade. I tried to hold on to small rituals, cooking dinner, watering the plants, folding laundry, acts of love I thought might remind them of who I was, of what I had given, but they mocked even that. Why bother? Elizabeth sneered one afternoon, watching me iron Robert's shirts. "He has Max now. Maybe the dog can wear them." The others laughed, and I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Loneliness became my constant companion. I would sit in the guest room at night, clutching old photo albums, tracing the faces of children who once loved me, who once ran into my arms without hesitation. I remembered birthdays with balloons and cakes, remembered nights of laughter around the dinner table, remembered the warmth of a family I had built with my own 2 hands. And I wondered, when had love turned into greed? When had children turned into conspirators? There were moments I almost broke. One night, after hearing them laugh about me again, I stood at the bathroom sink, staring into the mirror. My face looked older than I remembered, lines carved by years of sacrifice, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. "Maybe they're right," I whispered to my reflection. "Maybe I don't matter anymore." But even as the words left my lips, something inside me resisted. I thought of Jane's warning, of the whispered words she had overheard. "She won't stand in our way once the paperwork is done." They were building something, yes, but they were also underestimating me. They thought I was broken, finished, erased. They didn't see the fire that still flickered beneath the ashes. Humiliation had brought me low, yes, but it had also shown me the truth. I was alone, utterly alone, surrounded by those who should have loved me most. And in that loneliness, I began to feel the stirrings of something I hadn't felt in years: resolve. Still at that stage, I didn't act. I endured. I wept quietly into my pillow, endured the laughter, the mockery, the coldness. I endured being pushed from my own bed, from my own place at the table, from my own family. I endured because I thought maybe, just maybe, love could still reach them. But deep down, I knew the truth. Love had left this house long ago, and all that remained was greed. That was escalation's 3rd round. Isolation, humiliation, ridicule, a wife cast out, a mother mocked, a woman erased. But in the cracks of that pain, something new was forming, something that would not be ignored forever. By the time the 4th wave crashed over me, I was no longer just humiliated. I was crushed. The weight of it pressed down on me until I could hardly breathe. Every corner of the house, every photograph on the wall, every echo of laughter reminded me that I had been replaced, pushed aside, erased. And yet I stayed, like a ghost haunting my own home, waiting for some mercy that never came. The breaking point arrived on a Sunday, a day that once had been sacred in our family. Sundays used to mean pancakes at the kitchen table, sticky fingers and messy hair. The smell of butter and syrup filling the air while Robert teased the children, and I laughed until my stomach ached. But this Sunday was different. I had spent the morning alone in the guest room, staring at the sunlight filtering through thin curtains. My body felt heavy, as if the air itself was pressing me into the mattress. From the kitchen, I could hear laughter, the kind of laughter that used to include me, but now rang out without me, mocking me through the walls. I rose slowly, dressed in silence, and walked toward the sound. When I entered the kitchen, they were all there. Robert at the head of the table, Elizabeth pouring coffee, Charles flipping through his phone, Michael cracking jokes that sent the others roaring. Even Max had his own plate, steak cut into neat pieces, glistening with juice. I stood in the doorway, unseen, until Charles finally looked up and smirked. "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice thick with sarcasm. "We were wondering if you were still alive back there." The others laughed. Robert didn't even bother to look at me. I forced a smile and sat down at the far end of the table, where a small empty plate had been set. There was no food, no fork, not even a glass. I looked around, waiting for someone to notice, to care, but no one did. And they ate and laughed as though I were invisible. Finally, Elizabeth shoved a piece of toast toward me, the crumbs falling onto the table. "Here," she said flatly. "Don't say we don't feed you." The laughter roared again. My cheeks burned. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to demand, "How dare you treat me this way?" But my voice failed me. I sat there staring at that single piece of toast and realized I was no longer their mother, no longer his wife. I was a burden, a joke. I left the table quietly, my footsteps echoing in the hallway, and returned to the guest room. I shut the door, leaned against it, and slid down to the floor. Tears spilled freely then, hot and endless, soaking the front of my blouse. For the first time, I wondered if they would be better off without me, if perhaps I truly had no place left in this world. The thought terrified me, but it clung to me like smoke, seeping into every corner of my mind. That night, I dreamed of my younger self. I saw her clearly, bright-eyed, hopeful, standing in a white dress at the altar, holding Robert's hands while he promised to love me forever. I saw the girl who gave up her career to raise children, who clipped coupons to save for their school supplies, who stayed up late sewing Halloween costumes by hand because money was tight. I saw the mother who stood in the rain waiting outside soccer practice, the woman who sold her grandmother's necklace to cover a mortgage payment when Robert's business faltered. I woke up shaking, my pillow damp with tears. How could that girl have become this woman? How could 30 years of sacrifice be reduced to a crumb of toast tossed like garbage across the table? I nearly broke that morning. I stood in the bathroom, staring at the bottle of pills in the cabinet, my hand trembling as I reached for it. For a moment, the thought of silence, of escape, of not having to hear their laughter again seemed like a kind of mercy. But then I thought of Jane's voice, her quiet warning, "Don't let them make you doubt your worth." I slammed the cabinet shut, my breath ragged, and gripped the sink until my knuckles went white. No, I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. That afternoon, while the house was quiet, I wandered into Robert's study. It had been weeks since I dared step inside. The air smelled of leather and old cigars, heavy and suffocating. His desk loomed like an altar, its surface cleared except for a single folder resting near the edge. My heart pounded as I approached, my hand hovering above it. The folder wasn't locked away, wasn't hidden. It was there in plain sight, as if daring me to open it. I told myself to walk away, that it wasn't my place. But then I remembered his words. "Max needs space. You can sleep in the guest room." I remembered Charles's sneer. "Are you even family?" I remembered Elizabeth's toast sliding across the table like an insult, and I thought, no more. I opened the folder. Inside were pages of legal documents, neat columns of text, heavy with clauses I could barely understand. But as I flipped through them, one phrase leapt out at me, "Trustee and guardian of Max Lane." My breath caught. Guardian? Trustee? My eyes scanned the lines, trembling. It was clear. Robert had left everything to Max, yes, but someone had to be named to oversee it. Someone had to be legally responsible for the dog and, by extension, the fortune tied to him. And in that line, in neat black ink, was my name, Margaret Lane. My knees buckled, and I sank into the chair, the pages trembling in my hands. Guardian, trustee. I didn't understand the full weight of it yet, but instinct told me this was no small detail. My heart raced with a strange mix of fear and hope. They thought they had erased me, but here, hidden in the very paperwork meant to humiliate me, was a thread I could pull, a thread that might unravel everything they had planned. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at my name on that page, tears sliding down my cheeks. This wasn't just humiliation anymore. This was war. And for the first time in months, I felt a spark inside me, a flicker of strength I thought I had lost. I closed the folder, slid it back into place, and stood on shaking legs. My reflection in the glass cabinet across the room startled me. My face was pale, my eyes swollen from crying. But behind them burned something fierce. I whispered to myself, "They think I'm finished, but they have no idea." That was escalation's final blow. The moment I nearly broke, nearly surrendered, only to find the crack of light I had been searching for. They had mocked me, isolated me, cast me aside, but in their arrogance, they had overlooked one detail, and that detail would change everything. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the guest room, my heart pounding, the folder's words etched into my mind like a secret carved in stone. Guardian of Max Lane. Trustee. My name, not theirs. For weeks I had felt powerless, erased, but now there was something, a thread I could hold on to. I didn't yet know what it meant, not fully, but I knew enough to sense that the balance had shifted. They thought they had locked me out, but in their arrogance, they had left the key in plain sight. The next morning, I left the house before anyone else woke up. The air was cool, the sky just beginning to brighten with the promise of dawn. I walked quickly down the street, clutching my coat tightly around me, the folder's memory pushing me forward. For once, I didn't care if they noticed I was gone. Let them laugh over breakfast. Let them mock me again. They had no idea that I was already making my move. I called Jane as soon as I reached the corner. My voice trembled, but not from weakness, from urgency. "Jane, do you know a lawyer? Someone who isn't connected to Robert?" She hesitated. "I might. Why? What happened?" I took a deep breath. "I can't explain it all yet, but I found something important. I need someone I can trust." She gave me the number without question. That was Jane's way. Loyal, quiet, steady. I dialed as soon as I hung up. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. His name was Peter Andrews, a man who specialized in estate law. We agreed to meet that afternoon in his downtown office. Walking into that office was like stepping into another world. The walls were lined with books, heavy with knowledge. The smell of polished wood and old paper filled the air. Peter was younger than I expected, maybe in his 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He shook my hand firmly and gestured for me to sit. "What brings you here, Mrs. Lane?" he asked. I slid the copied page from the folder across his desk, my hands trembling. "This. Tell me what it means." He adjusted his glasses, read the lines carefully, then looked up at me with a flicker of surprise. "This clause. It names you as the guardian and trustee of the trust established for Max Lane." I swallowed hard. "In plain English, please." He leaned forward. "It means that while the assets are legally designated for the care of the dog, you are the one with full authority to manage those assets. Every account, every property, every dollar is under your control. As long as the dog lives, you are the sole decision maker." The room spun for a moment. "So, it's not really Max who owns everything." He smiled faintly. "Legally speaking, no. The dog is the beneficiary in name only, but you, as trustee, hold the power. You decide how the money is spent, how the properties are managed. In practice, it means you control the estate." I sat back, stunned. Weeks of humiliation, of being told I was worth less than a dog, and all along the law had placed me at the center. They thought they had stripped me of everything, but instead they had handed me the keys to the kingdom. Peter studied me carefully. "Does your family know you've seen this?" I shook my head. "No, they laugh at me. They think I'm powerless. They think I'm done." "Then don't tell them," he advised. "Not yet. Let them keep underestimating you. That's your greatest advantage." I nodded slowly, my mind racing. For the first time in months, I felt the shift inside me. I was no longer just the victim, no longer the humiliated wife or the mocked mother. I was holding something they couldn't see, something they had overlooked in their greed, and that made me dangerous. I left his office with the city buzzing around me, cars honking, people rushing by. But all I could hear was the echo of his words. "You control the estate." I clutched my coat tighter, a strange smile creeping across my face. They thought I was finished, but they were wrong. That evening, I returned home quietly. The house smelled of roasted meat, laughter spilling from the dining room. I paused in the hallway, listening. "Once it's finalized," Charles was saying. "She won't have a say in anything. We'll finally be rid of her." Robert chuckled. "Don't worry, son. Everything is in place." I stood there in the shadows, their words wrapping around me like barbed wire. But instead of cutting me, they strengthened my resolve. I whispered to myself, "Say what you want. Laugh all you like. You have no idea the storm that's coming." I stepped into the room then, forcing a calm smile onto my face. They looked up, startled, then smirked as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. "Good evening," I said softly. My voice didn't shake this time. I sat at the table, poured myself a glass of water, and joined them. Inside, I was burning with secrets, but outside, I was the same quiet Margaret they believed they had defeated. Let them think that. Let them believe I was broken, because the truth was I was already planning. Already shifting from defense to offense. The will they had used as a weapon against me was about to become the very blade I would turn back on them. For 30 years, I had been the silent one, the obedient wife, the mother who sacrificed and endured. But silence has its limits. Betrayal awakens something deeper, something sharper. They had mistaken my endurance for weakness, my loyalty for blindness. Now they would learn the difference. I looked at Robert across the table, at the children who smirked at me, and thought, "You gave the dog everything, but you gave me the leash." That was the turning point, the moment the story shifted. I was no longer waiting for mercy. I was preparing for battle, and they didn't even see it coming. The night I chose to confront him was colder than most. The autumn wind rattled the shutters, and the house itself seemed to hold its breath. Robert was in his study again, the amber glow of his desk lamp spilling out into the dark hallway. For weeks I had stayed quiet, watching, listening, gathering every sneer and every cruel laugh like stones in my pocket. Tonight, I was ready to drop them all on his head. I stood outside the door for a long time, my hand hovering over the knob. My heart pounded in my ears, but there was no fear now, only a grim calm, the kind you feel when the decision has already been made and all that's left is to play it out. I pushed the door open slowly. He looked up, startled. "Margaret, it's late." I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. "Yes," I said quietly, "it's late, too late." He frowned, set his pen down, and leaned back in his chair. "What's this about?" I walked toward the desk, my eyes never leaving his. The folder lay there, the same one I had opened days earlier, its edges worn from his constant handling. I placed my hand on it, pressing it flat against the polished wood. "This is about the will." His expression hardened instantly, but he tried to cover it with a smirk. "You shouldn't concern yourself with legal matters you don't understand." "Don't I?" I whispered. My voice was steady, sharper than it had been in months. "Because I read it, Robert, every line, and I saw my name." For a moment, the mask slipped. His eyes widened just slightly before narrowing again. "What are you talking about?" "Guardian of Max Lane," I said, savoring each word like a blade slipping between his ribs. "Trustee, my name, not yours. You left everything to the dog, yes. But who holds the leash, Robert? Who decides how the money is spent, how the houses are managed, how the accounts are controlled? Me. Not you, not Charles. Me." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. His jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the arms of his chair. "You don't know what you're saying." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying." I leaned forward, my face inches from his. "You tried to erase me. You tried to humiliate me, to make me less than a dog. But you were careless. You left the key in my hands. And now every cent you thought you had stolen is mine to control." His smirk returned, but it was weaker now, brittle. "You wouldn't dare. You don't have the spine." I straightened, meeting his gaze with a calm I hadn't felt in years. 30 years of silence doesn't mean weakness. It means patience. And I'm done being patient. He slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "You ungrateful woman! Everything you have, I gave you. This house, this life, those children, none of it would exist without me." My voice rose, trembling not with fear but with fury. "And what did I give, Robert? My youth, my dreams, my nights spent sewing costumes and clipping coupons while you built your empire on my back. You think this house is yours? These children are yours? No, they were ours. But you poisoned them against me. You fed them greed instead of love, contempt instead of respect. And now they laugh at me, mock me, treat me as if I'm nothing. That's not family, that's rot. And it started with you." His face flushed red, his eyes glinting with rage. "You think you can turn them against me now? You think one piece of paper gives you power?" I leaned closer, lowering my voice to a cold whisper. "Not one piece of paper. The law, the very law you tried to use to humiliate me. That law is mine now, and soon they'll know it too." For the first time, he looked uncertain. His mouth opened as if to retort, but no words came. He sat there, his chest heaving, his fists clenched, the mighty Robert Lane suddenly reduced to silence. I straightened, smoothing my blouse, and turned toward the door. My hand rested on the knob when I spoke again, my voice steady, calm, final. "You thought you buried me, Robert, but you only planted me. And now it's time you learned what grows in the dark." I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, leaving him behind in his pool of lamplight and rage. My hands trembled, yes, but not from weakness, from release. For the first time in years, I had spoken without fear, without begging for scraps of dignity. I had stood tall, and he had nothing to answer me with but silence. That was the private confrontation, the first battle in a war they didn't even know was raging. And though my knees shook as I climbed the stairs to the guest room, though my heart pounded so loudly I thought it might burst, one truth steadied me. I was no longer the woman they mocked. I was the woman holding the leash. The public confrontation came sooner than I expected. The lawyer had scheduled a second formal gathering for the extended family and a few close business partners to clarify the terms of the will. It was supposed to be routine, just paperwork and signatures. But to me, it was the stage I had been waiting for. For weeks, I had endured their laughter in private. Now the world would see who truly held the power. The day arrived gray and heavy, the kind of day when clouds hang low as if pressing the earth down. I dressed carefully that morning, not in the muted colors they were used to seeing me in, but in a deep blue suit Robert had once told me was too bold. My hands trembled as I buttoned the jacket, but my eyes in the mirror were steady. I wasn't going there as the discarded wife. I was going there as the woman who carried the leash they had tried to strangle me with. When I walked into the law office, I felt every eye turn toward me. My children sat together in a row, whispering, smirking, certain they were about to watch the final act of my humiliation. Robert was there too, stone-faced, pretending to be calm, though I could see the muscle in his jaw twitch. Business partners leaned forward with interest, sensing tension, smelling blood in the air like wolves. The lawyer cleared his throat, his voice calm and deliberate. "Thank you all for coming. Today we will finalize the administration of Mr. Lane's estate as outlined in his will." Charles smirked, nudged Elizabeth, and whispered something that made her giggle. I sat quietly, my hands folded, waiting. "As you all know," the lawyer continued, "the primary beneficiary of the estate is Max Lane, the family Labrador." A ripple of chuckles spread through the room. My children laughed openly, some of the business partners hiding smiles behind their hands. My cheeks flushed, but I held my ground. Let them laugh. The lawyer raised his hand for silence. "However, it is necessary to read the next clause for legal clarity. The appointed guardian and trustee of the estate, responsible for all assets and accounts designated for Max Lane is..." He paused, glancing at me. "Mrs. Margaret Lane." The room fell into stunned silence. The laughter evaporated like smoke in wind. My children froze, their eyes wide, their mouths half open, Robert's face drained of color. The business partners leaned forward, whispering to each other. I rose slowly, the sound of my chair scraping against the floor loud in the silence. My heart thundered, but my voice was calm. "You laughed at me," I said, looking at each of my children in turn. "You mocked me. You treated me as if I were worth less than a dog. But you forgot something. Dogs don't write checks. Dogs don't manage accounts. Dogs don't decide who lives in this house or who doesn't. I do." Elizabeth stammered, But that's not possible." Dad said, "Your father said many things," I cut in sharply. "He said he loved me. He said family came first. He said loyalty mattered. And yet here we are, 30 years of my life reduced to a cruel joke. But the joke," I leaned forward, my voice cold and sharp, "is on you." The lawyer cleared his throat again, reading from the papers. Clause 27. Any heirs who mock, demean, or interfere with the trustee's authority shall forfeit any secondary claims to the estate. Gasps filled the room. My children turned pale. Charles shot to his feet. "That's not fair. That's not what he meant." The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "It's what he signed." I looked at Charles, my eyes burning. "Do you remember laughing, son? Telling me I might as well be the dog's maid? Do you remember saying I wasn't even family anymore? Every cruel word you spoke was a nail in your own coffin." He sputtered. His fists clenched, but he had no defense. Elizabeth burst into tears, her mascara streaking down her face. "Mom, please, we didn't mean it. We were just joking." I straightened, my voice rising with the fury of years unspoken. A joke? To strip me of dignity? To cast me out of my own bed, my own table, my own family? If that was a joke, then laugh now, Elizabeth. Laugh now while the world sees you for what you are. The business partners murmured, some shaking their heads in disgust. The humiliation that had once been mine was now theirs. Robert finally stood, his face red with fury. "Enough of this charade! She doesn't understand what she's saying. She's always been weak, always been sentimental." "Stop," I snapped. My voice cut through the room like a blade. "Don't you dare call me weak. Weakness is hiding behind a dog to punish your wife. Weakness is poisoning your own children with greed. Weakness is thinking you could erase me with a signature. But strength—" I stepped closer, my eyes locked on his. "Strength is surviving every humiliation, every sneer, every betrayal, and standing here now holding everything you thought you had stolen." For the first time, he faltered. His lips moved, but no sound came. He looked around the room, searching for allies, but found only silence and stares. I turned to the lawyer. "Please continue." The lawyer nodded. "As trustee, Mrs. Lane has full legal authority to manage the estate. She may, at her discretion, distribute assets, liquidate properties, or remove residents from the family home if deemed necessary for the trust's administration." I looked at my children, their faces drained of hope. "You wanted me gone. You wanted me erased. But now every breath you take in that house, every meal you eat, every penny you spend, it's mine to allow, or mine to take away." The silence was electric, heavy with the weight of truth. Elizabeth sobbed harder. Michael stared at the floor, ashamed. Charles looked at me with hatred burning in his eyes, but even he knew it was useless. And Robert looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time, as if the woman he thought he had broken had been reborn into someone unrecognizable. I picked up the papers, folded them neatly, and slipped them into my bag. "This isn't revenge," I said softly, my voice carrying across the room. "This is justice. For every night I cried alone, for every time you mocked me, for every ounce of love I gave that you twisted into contempt, You tried to bury me, but you only planted me. And now I am the one who decides what grows." With that, I turned and walked out, the sound of my heels striking the floor echoing through the silent office. Behind me, I could hear the faint sobs of my children, the whispers of the business partners, and the hollow silence of Robert's defeat. That was the public explosion, the moment the truth burst into the open and burned away every lie. They thought the will was their weapon, but it had become mine. And in that room, in front of every witness, they finally understood. The woman they had tried to erase was the woman who now held everything. The news spread faster than I ever imagined. What had begun as a private humiliation in a lawyer's office was now a story carried by every whisper, every phone call, every raised eyebrow in town. The humiliation that had once been mine now belonged to them, and I didn't have to lift a finger. Jane was the first to call me. Her voice shook with awe. "Margaret, I was at the market this morning, and everyone's talking about it. They say you stood up in that office and silenced Robert like a child. They say your children looked like ghosts when the lawyer read your name." I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. For months I had been invisible, a shadow in my own home. Now suddenly I was seen again, not as the victim, but as the woman who had reclaimed her place. Later that week, I walked into the grocery store. Heads turned. People who once pitied me now looked at me with respect, even admiration. Mrs. Collins, a neighbor who had witnessed too many of my tears over the years, stopped me in the aisle. "Good for you, Margaret. About time someone reminded Robert Lane that arrogance has a price." I thanked her, my cheeks warm. For so long, shame had followed me like a shadow. Now dignity walked beside me. The story spread beyond our neighborhood. Robert's business partners, men who once slapped him on the back and shared whiskey in his office, began to distance themselves. One of them even called me. His tone was cautious, but I heard the respect underneath. "Mrs. Lane, I just wanted to say, what you did took courage. If you ever need support, you have mine." Support. For so long I had carried everything alone. Now, suddenly, I wasn't. The betrayal that had been hidden in whispers was now illuminated in public light. And once light touches rot, it can't be unseen. Even the children felt the sting. Elizabeth told me through tears that people at her workplace had started whispering behind her back. "They say I betrayed my own mother, that I laughed at you. They don't understand, Mom. They don't know the whole story." I looked at her calmly. "Oh, they understand enough. They understand that greed makes fools of us all." Charles tried to confront me in the driveway a few days later. His anger was raw, desperate. "Do you realize what you've done? You've ruined us. People look at me like I'm dirt." I met his fury with silence, then said evenly, "I didn't ruin you, Charles. You ruined yourself when you chose laughter over loyalty." He had no reply. Even Robert, the man who had once strutted through town with pride, now walked with his head low. The men at the club no longer invited him for golf. The women who once fluttered around him at charity galas now turned their faces away. He had built a reputation of power and control, but now he was the man who left everything to a dog and lost it all to the wife he thought he had destroyed. And through it all, witnesses emerged. People who had seen the cracks long before, who now spoke freely. One neighbor confessed she had heard Robert mocking me on the phone, calling me dead weight. Another admitted she had seen Elizabeth sneaking into the lawyer's office late at night. All of it added fuel to the fire, proof that I had never been paranoid, proof that betrayal had been real. The fire spread, and with it, my story was no longer just mine. It became a cautionary tale, a whispered legend in every living room, every shop, every cafe. "Don't underestimate a quiet woman," people said. "She might be holding the leash." That was the beauty of it. Betrayal had isolated me, but truth had set me back among people, had given me witnesses, allies, even strangers who now stood on my side. My pain was no longer private. It had become public drama, and in that exposure, justice grew stronger than any one woman could ever be alone. After the explosion, silence settled over the house like ash after a fire. My children no longer laughed at me. They no longer mocked me at the table or whispered when I entered the room. Instead, they avoided my eyes, moving through the hallways like ghosts, haunted by the echo of their own cruelty. Robert rarely spoke at all. The man who once filled every room with his voice now sat alone in his study, the light dim, his whiskey glass untouched. Power had slipped from his hands, and with it the arrogance that had built his entire identity. Outside our walls, the consequences grew sharper. Business partners withdrew their contracts. The bank froze accounts Robert had opened without my knowledge, citing irregularities. Lawyers began calling not to congratulate him, but to question him. His name, once a pillar of the community, was now a punchline whispered in boardrooms. The man who left it all to a dog, they said, and lost it all to his wife. My children suffered too. Elizabeth's friends stopped calling. At her workplace, colleagues whispered openly, their pity turning into judgment. The daughter who mocked her own mother, they called her. She came home one evening with her face streaked in tears, begging me to tell the world it wasn't true. But I only looked at her, calm and steady. The world only knows what you chose to show it, I said. Charles lost more than pride. His mortgage application was rejected after the bank reviewed his connection to Robert's failing reputation. The man who once smirked and called me irrelevant now stood on my doorstep, fists clenched, his voice breaking as he shouted, "You've destroyed me!" I answered softly, "No, Charles. You destroyed yourself when you chose greed over family." He turned away, defeated. Even Michael, my youngest, who had laughed the loudest, found himself abandoned. His friends no longer invited him to dinners. His fiancée, disgusted by the scandal, broke off their engagement. He stormed into the house, accusing me of ruining his life, and I said quietly, "Your life was never mine to ruin. You ruined it with every cruel word you spoke." He had no reply. As for Robert, the man who once commanded respect with a glance, he became a shadow. The golf club revoked his membership. Invitations to charity events disappeared. Old friends crossed the street to avoid him. In the end, he was left with nothing but his shame and the hollow echo of his own arrogance. He still had Max, of course. The Labrador, loyal and innocent, never understood the games humans played. I would often find Robert stroking the dog's fur, whispering words I could not hear. Perhaps he thought Max was the only one left who loved him. Perhaps he was right. But I was not broken anymore. I was free. I took control of the estate, not to flaunt wealth, but to rebuild dignity. I paid off debts quietly, secured the properties, ensured stability for the future. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without tears. And yet, the strangest thing was this. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel the gloating joy of revenge. What I felt was peace. Justice had been served, and dignity had returned to me. Not in whispers or shadows, but in full daylight. The people who had tried to erase me were erased instead, not by my hands, but by the truth they unleashed themselves. That was the aftermath. They carried the weight of their choices, while I carried only the strength I had rediscovered. And in that strength, I found something I had thought lost forever. Myself. Spring arrived quietly, as if the world itself wanted to remind me that life always finds a way to begin again. The pecan trees bloomed outside my window, their branches stretching toward the sky, and for the first time in years, I felt myself stretching too. I was no longer the woman locked away in a guest room, no longer the wife who trembled at laughter that cut like knives. I was the trustee, the guardian, the woman who had survived the storm and come out standing. Each morning, I walked Max down the tree-lined street. Neighbors waved, not with pity this time, but with respect. Some even crossed the street just to tell me, "Good for you, Margaret." You showed them all." I nodded politely, but inside I whispered to myself, I didn't show them. The truth did. The house that once echoed with contempt grew quiet. My children no longer mocked me. Some avoided me entirely, others spoke only in whispers, careful now, aware of how fragile their place was. Robert kept mostly to his study, a man stripped of the armor of arrogance. And me? I walked those halls with my head high, each step reclaiming the ground I had lost. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror, the same one that once reflected a broken, tear-streaked woman. This time, I saw something else. My hair, streaked with gray, was pulled back neatly. My eyes, once hollow, now burned steady and calm. I whispered aloud, "You are not less than a dog. You are not less than anyone. You are more." And I believed it. I began to live again, not for them, but for myself. I reopened the garden I had abandoned, kneeling in the soil, letting the earth stain my hands as flowers pushed through. I donated to charities quietly, directing funds to women's shelters and legal aid groups, places where women like me could find help before it was too late. I met with Jane for coffee, and we laughed, not bitter laughter, not laughter that wounded, but laughter that healed. I realized something important. It wasn't wealth that had saved me. It wasn't the clauses or the signatures or the technicalities of law. It was dignity. The moment I chose not to stay silent, the moment I chose to confront, to speak, to fight, that was the moment I began to win. Robert's will had tried to reduce me to nothing. My children's cruelty had tried to erase me. But the truth had given me something stronger than money. The knowledge that I could survive betrayal and still stand tall. So I ask you, the one listening to my story now, how many times have you been told you are nothing? How many times has someone laughed at you, mocked you, tried to erase you? And what will you do when that moment comes? Will you stay silent, or will you, like me, find the strength to rise? Because silence destroys, but truth, once spoken, sets you free. I close my eyes at night now with peace, not fear. The laughter that once haunted me has been replaced by quiet, steady strength. I walk each morning with Max by my side, and when neighbors wave, I know what they are really saying. She found her dignity again, and I smile because that is the only inheritance that truly matters. So if you have listened this far, if you have felt my pain and my rebirth, I ask you, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have fought for your dignity? Because in the end, money fades, power shifts, reputations crumble. But dignity is the one thing no will, no betrayal, no cruel laugh can ever take away once you choose to reclaim it.